So this is a conversation with Ghias Al Jundi. He's a Syrian-British human rights activist, and we talked about the recent fires at the Moria camp in Greece. The fires that burned through the camp recently left thousands of refugees and migrants houseless, turning a situation that was already being described as a living hell into something even worse. Ghias has been going frequently to Greece to help refugees who make the dangerous journey across the Mediterranean Sea. This is a reality that is the result of the European Union's decision to demonize migration and asylum, something that we also get into in this episode. Indeed, the EU has made it all but impossible for refugees to reach it via the land, forcing them to take the dangerous route through the Mediterranean. For more on that, you can listen to episode 35 on the deadly Balkan route. It was an episode that I recorded with Jack Sapo, coordinator of No Names Kitchen's Border Violence Reporting, itself part of the Border Violence Monitoring Network. But I wanted to speak with Ghias specifically because he knows very well what it means to leave one's home, as he himself fled Syria in 1998, after surviving torture in Hafiz Assad's dungeons. This direct connection is something that I think is reflected in our own conversation. As he told me in this episode, seeing migrants and refugees try and reach Europe's shores felt like Syria was coming to him this time. So I really wanted to emphasize one thing. What happened in Moria, and what has been happening for the past few years, is the result of political decisions. These are decisions being made by the European Union. These are decisions that can be unmade. Thousands of people have drowned in the Mediterranean Sea because the EU does not want to open its channels on the border. It really is that simple. This is the cost of Fortress Europe. This is not the first episode on this topic. Unfortunately, I seriously doubt that it will be the last episode on this topic. This problem is not going away. The European Union can decide to make a situation better, or it can decide to make things worse. Unfortunately, as of now, it remains the latter. So that's it from me. If you like what I do, please consider supporting this project with only $1 a month on Patreon on buymeacoffee.com, and you can also do so directly on PayPal if you prefer. Patreon is for monthly, PayPal is for one-offs, and Buy Me a Coffee has both options. And if you cannot donate, you can still help by reviewing this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ghias Al Jundi, and I'm a human rights consultant. I'm a British citizen originally from Syria. I've been living in the UK for nearly 22 years. And mostly I work in a human rights field. I have been working for major international human rights organizations. And now I am a consultant, so I work on different projects in different areas or sub-regions in the MENA. 5 years ago, exactly on the 1st of October 2015, I started volunteering in Greece to support refugees. I took the initiative. It was a personal initiative. I took it from after watching the news and seeing a boat sinking in the Mediterranean between Turkey and Greece. I immediately had the natural or the human reaction, booked my ticket, and next day I was on the plane to Lesbos. Even without knowing anything, I had the background, but I didn't know the area very well. I didn't know where the boats were coming, but all what I wanted to do is to go there and help out. I couldn't be just a passive witness. I wanted to be there, and I went there first trip from the 2nd of October, 2015. I went for a week, and the week extended to another week, so I stayed the first trip for like 36 days in one go. So I kept delaying my return to the UK, and in that time I witnessed the boats flooding, if I can say that. Immediately started volunteering on the beaches. I went to the north of Lesbos, where it was a hot spot, where the most of the boats came because it's very close to Turkey. And I was thinking one day, standing at the beach and looking at the boat coming full of Syrians. And that time I hadn't been to Syria for 16 years. And I said to somebody next to me, I said, now I could see Syria coming to me. Because one boat after one boat after one boat, and full of Syrians and other nationalities, but mostly that period, the Syrians were the biggest number. And I could see the country coming to me, actually. I could see different accents, different faces, different background, different religions, all coming to the beach. And so that trip lasted until last week. So I went frequently on my own personal. So I didn't work with any organization. I collaborated, but I didn't go as part of any NGO. So I didn't stop at all. I continued, defied the circumstances and the rules, gathered some money from here, some money from there, and I went and helped. So I went for five times between October and February, when the Turkish EU deal was signed, the infamous deal. After that, it was very difficult to go and work with the boats. So I started working in the camps or outside the camps, where people slept on the roads, on the pavement. And my main task was to provide humanitarian assistance, like food, drink, take people to hospitals, to doctors, interpret for them, bring milk for children, for babies, and all this, etc., etc. During the boats period, as I call it, the boats period, the Greek authorities opened an old army place called Moria. It was an army compound, old army compound, and then before the Turkish EU deal, people used to come, or refugees used to come from the boats to Moria, register, take something called expulsion paper, and go to the port, to the harbor, and go to Europe. After the deal and the border with the Balkans route closed, so people were kept in Moria. Moria is, as I said, it's an old army compound which was designed after changing it to a refugee camp to the capacity of 1,000 to 1,500. And soon it became overcrowded. I remember last year I went there and there were like about 18,000 people inside the camp and around it, because the camp was full. So people started living out in the olive groves around the camp. Facilities inside the camp were really bad or basic. Nothing was working. It was a failed attempt to keep refugees in the island. Also, the stress, the pressure, the bad conditions led to tension, to violence, to unrest sometimes, and the camp was not working. It was overcrowded, and it was on a hill as well. Few caravans were on the top of the hill, while tents were down. And when it rained, all the water came down inside the tents. So last year I went there and I witnessed families sleeping on the mud. One of the families were 3 people, including a 10-day-old baby. The baby was sleeping in that muddy tent because the tent was at the bottom of the camp, and all the water came, the rain came inside the tent. This is one case of the really unhealthy condition I've seen, but I've seen more than that. I've seen old people, young people being ushered into that camp without any hope. The biggest issue for refugees during these 5 years I've been going to was the lack of hope and the lack of any horizon, any solution. So until when we are staying here? This was a big issue. The other issue, the government was trying to ease up the pressure. So they tried to take some families to the mainland, mostly to the north of Greece, to Thessaloniki, where they put people in hotels. Also, the hotels had their own issues, but it was much better than Moria. But what happened? They mostly left these young men in the camp, sitting there, doing nothing, and have no hope of a change, of leaving somewhere. And as young men sitting around the whole day, 24 hours, doing nothing, the treatment is not good, the food is not good, the money is not good. So that also created a lot of tension between men themselves and also between nationalities: Syrian Afghans, Iraqi Syrians, Syrian Africans. So it was going into really difficult circumstances. People wrote on the wall, the refugee wrote on the wall, this welcome to Moria prison. And they meant it. They were able to go out and come back to the camp. But it was a prison in the island. The police started getting brutal because also this put pressure on the police. And then the locals, the Greeks, started changing their attitudes, because you have an island that has like 35,000 people, and you have a camp which has like 18,000, so like more than half of the population. And so that was the case for the last 5 years. In the beginning of September 2020, there was a fire in the camp, in the main body of the camp, which in the next days, it moved to other parts of the camp, including the olive groves on the top of the Moria camp. 95% of the camp was burned down. 95% of people had to flee very quickly. So they lost everything. One Syrian woman told me we lost everything. And that was the expression people repeated. Whenever I met people out of the camp, the first thing they said, we lost everything. People, all what they wanted to do is to survive, to get away from the camp, from the fire. And they slept for days and days on the pavements, even on the roads, after the police cut the roads from both directions, and without any support, or with little support, like food and the drink and the basic facilities, toilet, etc., etc. I visited the camp in mid-September 2020, and I went throughout. Went inside the camp, on the olive groves, everything was burned. And as a volunteer who's been there for 5 years, going on and off, I felt something inside me burned too. I became part of it. And the caravans I used to know, the families I used to know, I found only the remains of their tents, or the remains of their belongings, like half of a little pram, half of a chair, half of a little table. They made it from the olive wood. And in that time, like in mid-September, the Greek government started bringing in people to a new camp, a few kilometers far from Moria, and also was an army field. But this place, the new camp, was a shooting place, a training for the army. So people were rushed into, or pushed into the new camp, tents built very quickly, and without any planning. Without any planning, the biggest plan for the Greek authorities is to bring people from the streets, from the pavement, into this camp. Until now, I just been in touch with families. They don't have showers. This is like nearly a month. They don't have showers. Very, very limited number of unhygienic toilets. No shops, nothing. And so this one, the plan was to contain people, to bring them in and tell the public, all done, everything is sorted. In my last trip, which was in September 2020, I met dozens of families. I supported them, me and another colleague. We brought them food, drink, hygienic items, etc., etc. Mostly to those who were sleeping out of the camp on the pavement, with nothing, no food, no drink, no support, nothing. The families were absolutely traumatized because they expected that things, after the burning of Moria, that things would improve. But things didn't improve at all. They moved to a worse place. In Moria, before the fire, people started to settle down, to create their own atmosphere or environment. Many people built some little tents and turned them into shops, groceries, barbers, coiffeurs. They became part of the camp. They started creating their own lives there. So if you need bread, you don't need to go and wait on the line for like 2-3 hours to have very bad food. You go and buy food from a little grocery on the top of the camp. After the fire, people moved somewhere. They don't have anything. There was nothing to be supported. And in the first few days, they were not allowed to leave the camp. They were like contained inside the camp. And the army came and gave them one meal a day. Like at 5 o'clock, they give you 3 pieces of bread for the whole day. And it was really bad quality food. And many of them were like sleeping on the floor. The tents built on the soil. Like there was nothing separating them from the ground. Many were waiting outside the camps for days also to be allowed to come in because of the pressure of the big number of refugees getting into it. And we had witnessed very, very, very sad stories. We had witnessed Syrian women having miscarriage on the pavement because of they moved them from one place to another place and then to the camp. She came to the camp and the camp authorities said, you cannot come in tonight. Went back and slept on the pavement in front of the camp, and because she was exhausted, she lost her baby. She was like 2.5 months pregnant. But imagine a woman losing her baby. How sad it is for the woman and for the husband. But at the same time, she had no treatment. She had no shower to go after this terrific incident. She had no shower, no support, no psychological support, no emotional support, no place to have a shower, no medicine, no time to see a doctor to explain what happened. And that was one of the most sad cases we saw. We saw other families sleeping there. We saw a child crying. She was a Syrian family, for a Syrian family, and I came and I saw her. Are you okay? Why are you crying? And her mother said she wanted to go back home. And I was like amused that she still remember home. And she said to me, no. Home for her is Moria. Even this 3-year-old child realized that she lost Moria, where she was settling. She has her tent, playing out with children, while now she's hiding behind a big rubbish container, which covered them, gave them shelter, and had no food or no drink or no friends or nobody. So she was crying to go back to Moria. Even the child felt the difference between Moria and where they were going to. After people went into the camp, to the new camp, they had nothing, as I said before. So they started coming back to Moria, to the burnt down Moria, and look for some items which survived the fire, like old mattresses, old chairs. And then the police decided, oh, this is a military area, so you cannot bring things in. So you go up on the really steep hill and bring chairs, mattresses, whatever, and you come to the camp. And the police said, no, you're not allowed to bring in anything. So I saw like an Afghani woman who went and brought some items from her tent, which didn't burn, and she collapsed in front of the new camp. She absolutely collapsed, crying, I just want my stuff inside. And they were all plastic, so it will not be a crime possibility, it will not hurt anybody. But then the Greeks are very, very, very tough when it comes to army or military issues. Two other women, Afghani women, refused to go back to the camp because they didn't let them take the mattress, they didn't let them take the chairs, and then they kind of protested outside for 2 days, and we were providing them with food and drink. One woman was 6 months pregnant, and she brought something from her tent because she had back pain. I saw the doctor letter that she needs to sleep on a hard surface, while her tent was full of stones and little items and bullets also, because it's a military shooting training. Until next day she had to go. She accepted to go into the camp without her item, because we convinced her that if you go to the camp, at least if you have any problem with your pregnancy, they will call the doctor. If you are out on the pavement, nobody will look after you. This is the story in short between Moria and the new camp. I went back to Moria 3-4 times to see what happened, or to see if people were still there to support them. And I tell you something, within this depressing atmosphere people used to feel inside Moria, I found so many people, mostly young men who stayed there for years, going back to Moria, standing in front of the camp, silent, absolutely motionless, and looking at the camp. Maybe nostalgia, maybe, oh my God, like we thought we would be improved. Maybe we thought they would look after us better. And I spoke to them, to some of them, and they were like saying, oh my God, now we can feel the pleasure between two brackets of Moria. We had our tents, we settled in it, we know we're not moving anywhere, and now we don't know what is happening. Also, I wanted to go back to tell you about Moria. Moria had prison. Inside Moria camp, there was a prison. And also there was a unit for underage, like children under 16 who came without their parents. And the fire came to that 2 units at some point, because the underage refugees were not allowed to leave after a certain time. So they were moved out of the camp. While I interviewed I met some refugees who were in prison, and they were only released when they could feel the heat of the fire. Like the fire nearly surrounded the prison. And by that time, they started banging at the doors of the prison, and then the police opened the doors and let them out. And one Palestinian man told me, when I went, I could feel terrible heat in my face, because the caravans next to us were like all on fire. So this was the prison unit where people were detained because either the Greek government wanted to deport them, or they wanted to put them on trial because they came recently. Some of them were there for like 8 or 9 months inside that prison, or if there was a refugee committed a crime. But the vast majority of people were in that prison were there because of immigration issues, either sometimes because people from countries like Pakistan or Bangladesh or something, where people think, oh, these people should not have applied for asylum or should have not came to Greece. So this is the story of Moria. Between 2015 and 2020, there was what a Syrian family called it the journey of pain. Like, you are in that camp and you don't know what your rights were, your possibility of settling down anywhere, or at the same time you were not allowed to leave the island until the government or the Greek authorities let you go, which they organized few trips for families or vulnerable people. So they gave you special cards and you can leave. The camp circumstances became so much worse after the corona virus. From February, the camp kind of get closed down. Even until recently, there was no single corona case inside or outside Moria. No refugees were tested positive, but at the same time, there were like a lot of kind of propaganda outside that all refugees will bring us COVID-19, despite the fact that all cases in the island were Greeks. So this also put pressure on the government, put pressure on the local authorities to kind of push people inside Moria. Sometimes they stop them from going to the town where like people go and receive money or buy food or buy clothes, and this escalated the pressure until some cases were found, like some corona positive cases were found, and then the government or the local government completely closed Moria down and put these cases under specific circumstances or specific conditions. And people, the refugees were protesting. Okay, some Greeks also were tested positive. Why didn't you do the same to them? Why it's us? And there were some protests, and the protests were unheard completely. And then it's with the fire, how the fire started. Some angry people felt they were like discriminated against and also not treated. So these people who tested positive, they were put in a tent and you stay here. We don't care if you affect other refugees or not, as long as you don't come to town and affect locals. And this is the anger among refugees. The extra anger started, and it's how the fire started. In the last 2 days, I go back to the new camp. Then the new camp is built at the seafront. There's no barrier between the camp, the tents, and the water. And also, it's at the beginning of a hill. So yesterday, for example, it rained for like 2 hours, and the pictures I've seen today is painful, are painful, because the tents became like muddy. All the water came into the tents from the hill. Some tents had pallets, the wood floor, but the majority not. And people, children, women, men, old, young, everybody slept on this mud. And in the last 24 hours, I have my phone ringing all the time. Please come and help. Please come and help. We are in the middle of a crisis. We are living on a mud, and nobody is looking after us. This is the situation which will be getting worse in the winter, and also people afraid of the sea, of the waves, because the waves will reach when it's a wavy area. The waves would reach the tents, and also there are a lot of concerns that children might be affected going to the sea by mistake or falling into the water. So this is a current really sad situation there. I mean, the government in the last few days did some good positive signs. So, for example, the underage were all taken out of the island, which is good, and some vulnerable families were also taken to mainland, mostly to the north of Greece, but only a few hundreds, like maybe 3 or 4 boats left. That's, let's say, approximately 2,000 people, while we have at least 10,000 people in the camp now. A few were taken to flats into Mytilene, to the town, but the vast majority is still in the camp. 10 minutes ago, before I start speaking to you, I had a phone call from an Iraqi woman who also sent me pictures how they are living in the tent now. All wet, everything is wet. And she has 2 children, both under 6. And she is there. She had some few items, they're all wet. And as I said before, people lost everything. So the woman and the family, they don't have spare clothes, for example. Like when you are wet in that tent, you change. So this is really the painful situation in Lesbos, and I cannot see any good thinking from the government. I cannot see any urgency to transfer these people to hotels inside Lesbos or anywhere, or to the mainland. I cannot see any proper positive signs happening.
Well,
Is it
thank
okay,
you.
or?
It is. Sorry. Well, thank you a lot for this, first of all.
You're welcome.
This is a story that, well, obviously many people have been following, but for the most part, I was in the UK before, and now I'm in Switzerland, and it is very easy to forget. It's very easy to not think about it. It's very easy to just pretend it's not happening because it's quote unquote far away. And I was wondering if we can get a little bit, at least, into the fact that at the end of the day, not only has, of course, the Greek government essentially abandoned Lesbos to quote unquote deal with this, but the EU central government, Brussels, has also abandoned Greece. I say this not to sympathize with the Greek government, far from it. It's just a reality that there are lots of countries in Europe that simply don't want to deal with it. And there is this, of course, this Accords, the Dublin Accords, in which, the first EU countries that receives the refugees, well, it's your problem.
Yeah, I was about to mention that, actually.
Please go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So, despite what I said before, I still feel very sorry for Greece. And I mentioned that quite often, and I also felt that on the ground, either by speaking to locals or to the authorities, or seeing the atmosphere live. I feel sorry for Greece in general. I feel sorry for the locals who had also a lot of pressures on them. Greece has been abandoned by the EU. The EU left Greece on the front line, and they don't want to have anything to do with it. I mean, they supported Greece with some fund to deal with it, but the issue is not funding. The issue is there must be a solution. There must be a plan where these people can be accommodated in a better condition in different places, and to respect the locals. The island should be open for people to live. Nobody, no single refugee I spoke to from any country wanted to stay on the island. So Greece is really struggling, and they had been abandoned completely. Before that, I mean, Greece used to be always a gate for immigration or migration through maybe recent history, but people came and left. While now, because of the pressure of the EU, the people came and stayed, and Greece is not prepared for that. Greece is not ready for that. Greece already in a very, very terrible economic crisis. Politically wasn't settled until recently, and so literally Greece is, I could see it, is a victim also, left alone to deal with this really bad scenario. My views are the solution is in Brussels. The hope for refugees also is in Brussels. It's not enough for Brussels to give money to Greece. Also, the money is not going always in the right direction as well. So like refugees are not benefiting properly from the fund or from the money, but the money is not enough. Greece needs help. Greece needs appreciation and support, political and economic support, and a solution. These guys, the refugees in Lesbos now, they're all few thousands. They can be distributed for like 27 or 20, the other 27 countries. They can be moved. Like take Athens, for example, people who were allowed to go to Athens. Some streets next to Victoria Square or Arnoun, a lot of refugees settled and started their business, started their shops, started their social lives, social clubs. But why people were forced, or if I say in another word, why Greece was forced to keep these refugees in the islands? So the Greece unfairly treated by the EU, absolutely. And I feel strongly for Greece, and I feel strongly for the locals, which I expressed in my last visit. I told people, I feel sorry for you. I feel sympathy, empathy, that you also are suffering.
And in sort of the backdrop of this, for those listening, I have mentioned this in a previous episode, so I will also link that. But in the backdrop of this is this infamous deal with Turkey, the EU-Turkey deal. And of course, separate but complementary to this is the separate deals that the EU has done with countries like Egypt and especially Libya, notoriously Libya. What can you tell us about the more recent supposed plan that the EU has put forward? I've already seen a lot of criticism of it. I haven't had time to dive too much into it. It does seem to be pretty much the same thing, but under a different coating. Maybe maybe from what I understood, maybe the bureaucracy will be a bit accelerated, but more than this, I didn't really understand. If you know about this, if not, it's okay. And sort of attached to this, the EU-Turkey deal, the EU-Libya deals, all of this. Essentially, what they do is it's criminalization of migration. It's criminalization of the process of asylum seeking as well, which is it's supposed to be illegal under international law and illegal under EU law for that matter. How have and here, feel free to go as much into it as you want. If you know the legal aspects of not, it doesn't really matter. But how has this been playing out in the past 5 years? And what can people who are listening to this, especially folks who live in the EU, of course, but even those who don't, what can they do about it? Who can they pressure? What can they call for? What are some of the things being proposed? Because obviously this is not okay. I mean, that's putting it very mildly and very lightly. What is to be done? Let's put it this way.
Actually, the EU-Turkey deal is a disaster. It's completely a disaster when it comes to human rights, when it comes to refugee rights. So the EU paid Turkey to keep refugees in Turkey, to keep them away from us. But they didn't care, or they didn't press on Turkey to treat refugees well, according to the international human rights law or international humanitarian law, anything. Refugees are suffering in Turkey. I mean, last year, Turkey deported tens of thousands people to Syria. Where to? To the most dangerous area of Syria, to Idlib. Refugees, where you go out to buy bread and you leave your family and children in your flat, and the Turkish police will catch you next to the bakery and put you on a bus and send you to Idlib. So you are in Idlib and your wife and children is in Istanbul. So the EU didn't, all what they wanted was to stop people coming under any price. It happened to Libya, with other countries. You see the Libyan forces sank boats, and the EU didn't say anything, didn't condemn. It's a crime, it's a war crime to sink refugee boats. So this is back to the EU. It's the deal wasn't comprehensive. The deal was mostly political to tempt the Turkish government to keep refugees away from Europe. And okay, we turn a blind eye about what's happening. Even people who live in Turkey now, they are subjected to very, very harsh conditions. Like if you live in Gaziantep, you cannot leave your town. You cannot leave. You need the wali or the mayor to give you a permission to leave. If you have any business somewhere else, I know a Syrian family who had an interview with one of the EU embassies in Ankara, and they were not allowed to go. So they missed the opportunity to come legally to Europe. So what's happening with the EU? The EU, I mean, many other activists, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, all the major international human rights organizations wrote about that, campaigned for that, lobbied, and the EU still did nothing. So if you remember, the Turkish government recently opened the borders, and they said to refugees, "Oh, we opened the borders, and now you can go to Europe." And people rushed. Why do you want to leave Turkey if you are living happily there? thousands of people came to the borders, and the Greek government pushed them back. And the only thing, this is the only time where Greece had so-called support from the EU, is to come to the border and said, oh, push them back and we support you. And they sent a few boats and a few personnel to the land border. And this is the problem. This is the problem.
And Ursula von der Leyen famously called the Greek government the shield of the EU, using very militarized terms to describe refugees and migrants.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So they support the military to push people back or to push the boats back, but they didn't support Greece to deal with the crisis. Okay, if people are not coming now, it's okay, but you have tens of thousands of people stranded all over Greece without any possible solution. And this is very, very bad from the EU. This is very bad, because if you want to have an agreement with Turkey, you have a proper agreement, like you give refugees a residency, right to work, right to movement, right to medical care, etc., etc., etc. While I named it as a bribery. The EU bribed Turkey. Like, I give you money, but please stop them coming.
Yeah, that is literally what they did. Yeah.
Yeah, it's bribery. It's like, why somebody wants to leave? Well, I don't want to leave England because I'm happy here. So why would people want to leave if they are happy? But they are not, because they don't have rights. Until now, the Turkish government called them our guests. But also the guest is not honored. So if I'm your guest, I can move, I can work, I can write, I can live my freedoms. And this is not there. This doesn't exist in Turkey. Refugees are having tough time. If you take the civil society, for example, the Syrian civil society, many NGOs were closed down by the Turkish authorities. Many journalists were arrested. Many humanitarian workers were harassed. So it's not working. And also the EU keeps delaying the problem. And instead of finding a solution, they are delaying it. They are pushing it back, and it appears pushing back. When they have problem with the Turkish government, it goes on the surface. They have agreement, it dies down. And they are delaying the crisis.
Well, first, I really want to thank you again for going into that many details and for sharing all of this. I will sort of close on my side by simply saying that, as I said, there's at least one or two other episodes that I've done in the past few months. One that goes into the Balkan routes, because there's quite a lot of horrors happening there. And the other that looks at wider EU policy. And of course, there's going to be more of these coming. So what I wanted to ask you, sort of kind of like a closing note, is, can you talk a bit about your own journey in this story? And I'm putting this very vaguely, of course. Like, I actually read this article. I don't know if you can confirm that you found relatives by accident on one of the trips in Greece. Can you talk about that process? Essentially, of course, psychologically, this cannot be easy. And again, putting it very mildly. Just so that people also understand the more direct connections that many of those who are going to Greece from other parts of Europe to help, some of them might have direct connections. Of course, not everyone has direct connections. But yeah, if we can just get a bit into this, and we'll close off on that note.
Yeah, during these 5 years of volunteering in Greece, I met so many people who I knew by coincidence, or they were relatives or friends of my family or my friends. So it was one of the painful and surprising sides of my volunteering. One day I met my family. Also, my family, part of what's happening in Syria, and my family also opponents, like historically anti-Assad regime. So some of my family had to leave, and I was volunteering one day in Greece. I was on the beaches, and I received this message that we are on one of the boats. So I took some members of my family out to the boats, and I mostly didn't recognize any of them because I haven't been for years and years into Syria. So I was taking everybody out, like as I used to do, and I looked and I saw somebody who is like really from my family, and that was one of the peak moments I lived. Imagine you don't see your family for 16 years or 17 years, and then suddenly they appear on a rubber boat, which like usually whenever you see a boat coming, you feel the pain of worries about people to make it to the land. And then suddenly my family, members of my family and relatives, also friends, were on a boat, and it wasn't easy at all. I mean, I took them out, hugged them, and after they went up to the road, they were like, the reality came back to me. It's like, oh my God, that's why I'm not allowed to go to Syria, so that's why I'm supposed to meet my family on this rocky beach. And I remember sitting down, they were all up there, like getting dry and changing. And all my colleagues, the volunteers, went up, and I stayed there down for like a few minutes to reflect. Is that really possible? Is that true? Like I'm meeting my family here, and it was a moment of pain and something vague. I didn't know how to define my feeling. Actually, the first feeling was they survived, they reached safety, but after that, it was a moment of pain, really, like the pain that what's happened to Syria. My family was part of the tragedy, the Syrian tragedy, but I can tell you something. This is a moment I have never ever wanted to live. I didn't want to live. I was shocked, surprised, shocked, and happy. So the feeling was so strange, and I still remember it. In my last trip last week, I went back to the same place where they landed. So I was driving with a friend there, with a colleague, and then I told him to stop, and I went, and I saw exactly the exact point where the boat came. Like literally, I could see the boat in the exact point on the beach. And then when I told him the story, he was a Greek, and he cried. He literally cried. He said, "Oh my God, I would have melted down." I said to him, "I still melt down. That's why I told you to stop."
Well, on that note, thank you a lot for your time. This has really been very informative, to say the least. thank you for what you're doing in general, and good luck doing the rest. There's no sugarcoating it. This is not easy. So thank you.
But thank you for your interest. And then it's human rights is continuity. If you do something and don't continue, you can't change. So I met a photographer who met me in October 2015, and she realized me. I met her last week, and she came. She said to me, "Oh, yes, oh yeah," and she said, "Oh my God, you're still coming?" I said, "And I will still go." It's a commitment. It is a commitment, and will definitely keep going. I mean, I know I'm an individual. I can only change a little bit, but bringing clothes to a family and little children last week who had nothing, it makes you think like, yeah, I'm going back. So I will go back.
Awesome. Thank you for a lot for your time.
Yeah, thanks.